Design thinking is a framework for creating things. And creating things is something that Seymour Papert, the founder of constructionism, used to talk about as, quote, hard fun, according to his colleague Mitchell Resnick at the MIT Media Lab. Hard fun. It's an appealing concept, right? Here's what Mitchell Resnick has to say. Quote, they're going to learn fast when they work on things they really care about. Seymour once said that education has very little to do with explanation. It has to do with engagement, falling in love with ideas. Design thinking is one of the many options in your teacher toolbox, but it's a good option. So let's dive into what it is, what it means, and what it has to do with hard fun. Welcome to the Spark Creativity Teacher Podcast, a podcast for English teachers looking for more. More creativity, more engagement, more joy, and no more scripted curriculum, lesson planning ruts, or boring book lists. I'm Betsy Potash, and I'm honored you're trusting me to help. You're not alone on this creative journey anymore. I first learned about design thinking when I read Dr. John Spencer's book, Empower, and interviewed him on the podcast years back. He had his own twist on design thinking for education, which he called the launch cycle. The Stanford Design School model is a little bit different, so let me just kind of walk you through the two. In the Stanford Design School model, there's 5 stages. You empathize with the people you want to help. You work on defining the problem you want to solve. You brainstorm and think of tons of ideas for how you might solve it. You prototype a solution based on all those ideas and the one you like the most, and then you test it out with the people you're trying to help and you see what they think. Then you can sort of revolve back into the cycles and keep going because your test will likely not be perfect. In John Spencer's version that he developed with A.J. Giuliani and calls the launch cycle, it all starts with look, listen, and learn. So this is kind of parallel to the empathize stage. Then comes ask tons of questions. This is a bit parallel to the define stage, but there's a next step here that's still in the design stage, and that's understand the process or problem. So these two are still just, you're trying to figure out exactly what is going on. How could there potentially be a fix? What do people want? Then in the launch cycle, it moves to navigate ideas, which I feel like lines up really well with ideate from the Stanford model. Then in both cycles, it's prototyping time. In the launch cycle, they go to highlight and fix, whereas in the design thinking model at Stanford, they go to test, still pretty parallel. But one thing I really like about the launch cycle is that then there's another step, which is launch to an audience. The Stanford cycle of design thinking ends at test. I think it's implied that there will eventually be some kind of launch. You will use the thing that you designed. But I really like seeing it in John Spencer's launch cycle. I like that it's called the launch cycle. I like how his graphic has a great big rocket ship in the middle of it. I think when it comes to design, it's nice to put this idea you're going to be launching to an audience front and center in students' minds. So what's the deal with this design thinking model? Why even use it? Why think about it? Why apply it to your ELA class? Well, whether you choose to use the design thinking bootleg framework from Stanford or John Spencer and A.J. Giuliani's launch sequence, design thinking is just a useful frame. It applies to so many things. You can use it to solve problems, and it helps make solving those problems feel a little more chunkable, doable, step by step, instead of just offering like, hey, here's this big problem, let's figure it out, right? It's easier to approach a big problem with a plan. And this plan has integrated in it a lot of thoroughness, a lot of creativity, thinking about the people that you're trying to help. And that's not always true when people approach problems. If students follow these steps, they're going to have to think deeply about the problem they're trying to solve, the context of the problem, the people they want to help, a whole range of possibilities for helping and the best options for solving it. There's a lot of critical thinking in there and empathy and creativity. And these are things we want happening in our classrooms, right? The other great thing, in my opinion, about design thinking is how much it puts forward growth mindset. Students are going to have this idea of prototyping. And this is something that I say all the time, just in my personal life, my family life. When something doesn't go well, when we get lost, when we pack the wrong thing, whatever, I always try to say, oh, prototyping. This was our first time trying this. We'll prototype it again next time. We'll do better. And that mindset in the classroom is so helpful, right? Students make something, they test it out, it doesn't work that well. They learn something that is embedded in the design thinking model. That is the intention. They wouldn't call it a prototype if it wasn't meant to not be perfect and then be improved, because then they just call it a product, not a prototype, right? That's the very nature of design thinking, is that you're going to design a prototype that isn't going to be just the thing. You're going to test it, and then you're going to improve it. Maybe you're going to test it 20 times, depends on the project. Design thinking also gives students a lot of agency. It really allows them to approach many different types of problems. If you do a design thinking project, likely you're going to be giving students quite a bit of freedom to solve some kind of problem in some kind of way, right? Because if it was all just 100% step-by-step laid out for them, they wouldn't need design thinking. But the reality is, a lot of problems they'll be trying to solve in the future will not be 100% like step-by-step, fill in this form and then use it to do this worksheet and then use it to do this. Like, there's going to be a little bit more figuring out the steps for themselves through design thinking. So you can use the design thinking model for almost any project, but let's look at a couple of examples. I'm planning to use it next year as I launch an app design project with my 9th grade class in the fall. We're going to read The Outsiders, and I want students to design apps that will somehow help break down polarized digital bubbles, the ones that we're all in. So The Outsiders is all about kind of breaking down the barriers between the socks and the greasers and wishing that the world was different and that people could connect more and understand each other. And so that's going to be the goal with these apps. But there are so many different ways that students could design an app to help bring people together online, to help people understand each other across political boundaries. And so they can talk to people about their favorite apps, talk to people about what upsets them on social media, talk to people about, what would make them feel more comfortable talking to somebody who had different views than them, or what they might share online with somebody who they disagree with, like where they might find a connection. And then they can design wireframes for these apps and imagine out what they're going to look like. And then they can try to prototype it in different ways. Obviously, we're probably not going to actually program apps, although who knows? We'll see. But they can test out images of the apps with users and watch where they tap, or where, ask them, what would you want to do if you were faced with this screen? Or is there anything confusing about this? They can work directly with their users, because they can work with each other, or they can go into another class to test out their prototypes. Okay, design thinking could also be a wonderful frame for a PBL unit to tackle some kind of community problem or do a community project. I've talked to a couple of guests over the years on the podcast that have students working on problems or projects in the community. Kathleen Beachboard, who I spoke to a few years ago, kind of collected a set of community problems from local business owners and then turned them over to students and let them try to solve them. Design thinking would be a really good frame there. Iowa Big, which is a really cool, innovative program in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, whose co-founder joined me on the podcast years back, also guides students in tackling community projects. And again, if you're seeing a big problem and a write-up about it from the community, where's a good place to start? Empathy research. The first step of design thinking, whether you're using Launch Cycle and inviting students to ask questions and look, listen, and learn, or if you're using the design thinking model, inviting them to empathize, Go speak with people who are having the problem. Learn what the problem is like and how it affects them. This type of frame, the problem project from the community, is great for design thinking. Genius Hour would probably be great for design thinking. There are lots of different projects you could do in class. If they're a little bit looser, if they allow some freedom for the students to make choices about what they're going to tackle or how they're going to tackle it, design thinking could be a good frame. Now, what about you as the teacher? Yes, you can use design thinking too. My guess is you already are. Imagine for a second that you want to start a new choice reading program. Yay. You might start with empathy, trying to figure out what's going on in your students' reading lives. You might ask them about when they read, how they read, what they read, why they don't read if they don't read, when they used to read if they don't read now, what kinds of reading frames at school that they used to like. Did they like the old stop, drop, and read? Did they like when their only homework was to read at night for 10 minutes? Did they used to read on car trips? Help them get to their memories of reading. Talk to them about what worked for them. You might brainstorm ideas then for your program based on what you learned from these conversations, right? That's going to be a little bit different than just starting with what you've read about the best possible choice reading program, because choice reading programs do look a bit different in every room with every group of students. It just depends, right? So if you can tailor your program a bit around what you learned from students, alongside the things that you've learned from your research, from your exploration online, and then you can cobble together a program that fits what your students seem to want and need. But then also, once you start to roll out this program, you can keep it a bit loose in your mind, because this is your prototype in the design thinking model, right? You might roll it out based on what you read, based on what you talked to students about, and then you notice a bunch of stuff right away. You notice that when you say, let's read quietly for 15 minutes, everybody sort of hits the wall at 10. So maybe you adjust and you say, oh, we're going to start with 10 minutes, actually, I decided, right? And maybe you notice that students are super obsessed with your fantasy shelf, but you only had 5 books on there and they're going really fast. And so you know, as part of your research there with your prototype, you start to fill it in with more fantasy books, because you can see that's what students want right now. Maybe you notice 3 of your students really can't sit still to read right now. It's super hard for them, and you decide to make available during reading time listening to audiobooks, and you get 3 sets of headphones over at a little table at the side, and you put some wobble boards there and some sketch notes forms, and you say, hey, look, you know, if you're really having trouble concentrating right now and you want to build your reading stamina up a little bit, one option for you is this audiobook center, and you can listen to your book over here, and you can stand on this wobble board, and you can draw sketch notes while you listen, and that could be helpful for you. So think about if that's something you want to take advantage of. Now, at this point, you're free to loop back into any phase of the designing process at any time. You can be continuously designing and redesigning your program as it moves forward. You can add new elements, see how they go, respond to student needs that come up, pare back things that aren't working. As a designer with a design mindset and education, you're just trying to create the best possible experience for your students. And something that's not working is just evidence that you're ready to tweak your prototype and move forward. It's not a failure, right? If you roll out your choice reading program and it doesn't go perfectly in the first day, that is not a failure. That just means you prototyped it, you learned some stuff, you go forward. That's the growth mindset of design, and it's what we want for our students, and I think it's also what we want for ourselves. Okay, my friend, I bet as you listen today, you realize that you already use a lot of elements of design thinking in your work and in your life, and that you've already encouraged this kind of thinking in your students, maybe without this name. But there's something nice about the framework, right? You can really point to it and you can say, look, this is a thing that people are using all over the place. Professionals are using it in their work contexts, as well as students and teachers in the education context, teachers being professionals and in the education context, of course. And then you're teaching them this model that they can use all their lives. You're giving them this gift that they see themselves as designers stepping into a context of empathy, creativity, and growth mindset that can really help them do meaningful, engaging work that fits that concept we brought up at the start of the show of Seymour Papert's hard fun. All right, thanks so much for joining me today. Until next time, take care of yourself and stay creative.